Graduation day was supposed to be one of the proudest moments of my life. I had imagined it so many times, me walking across that stage, my name being called out clearly to a crowd filled with clapping, smiling faces, and right in the front row, my family rising to their feet, cheering louder than anyone else in the auditorium. I had worked toward this day not just for myself, but for them. Years of stress, exhaustion, and long nights spent flipping between spreadsheets and textbooks while juggling shifts at a diner and later an overnight customer support job. Earning my master's in data science wasn't just an academic achievement, it was proof that all that sacrifice had meant something. I thought they'd be proud. I thought they'd show up. I had reserved those seats weeks in advance, making sure they'd be front and center so they'd have the best view. I even took a picture of the reservation card with their names printed neatly, texted it in our group chat with a message that said, "Can't wait to see you all. This means everything to me." No one replied, but I assumed they were busy or just didn't know what to say. My family isn't the most expressive, and I'd gotten used to that. I told myself it didn't matter. What mattered was that they'd be there. The night before, I spent almost an hour ironing my gown, smoothing out every wrinkle with the kind of care I never used on my own clothes. I laid it out on the edge of my bed like a symbol of everything I had earned. I barely slept, not because I was anxious, but because I kept replaying that moment in my head, how it would feel to step out from behind the curtain and see their faces in the crowd, how my mom would probably cry, how my dad might not say much but would nod with that look in his eyes that always meant "I'm proud of you," even if he couldn't find the words. The morning of, I got up early, did my hair the way my sister once told me looked like a professional, and even wore the earrings my grandmother had given me years ago, the ones I saved for special occasions. I didn't want to just graduate, I wanted to show them the person I had become. I left my apartment with my gown carefully folded over one arm, cap tucked under the other, and a tight feeling in my chest that I mistook for excitement. The auditorium was already buzzing when I arrived. Grads were hugging each other, families holding bouquets, some with balloons or handmade signs with glittery letters. I scanned the crowd for a familiar face and didn't see any, but I told myself it was still early. Maybe they were parking. Maybe they were inside already. I went backstage with the others, lined up alphabetically, and waited. When my name was finally called, Emily Hartley, Master of Science in Data Science, I took a deep breath, fixed my smile, and stepped out into the blinding light of the stage. I held my head high. I looked toward the seats I had reserved in the front row, the ones that were supposed to be filled with the only people I cared about being there. But they were empty. All of them. For seats with printed cards taped to the backs that fluttered slightly in the AC breeze. I looked away fast, tried to focus on the dean's hand as he shook mine, tried to keep the smile on my face as the camera clicked. But something in me cracked open at that moment. The silence where their cheers should have been was deafening. I hadn't realized until then how loud absence could be. I heard every clap from strangers' hands. Every cheer from someone else's family. And I felt like I was in a vacuum where none of it reached me. I walked across that stage, diploma in hand, my heart pounding so hard I felt it in my throat. I took my seat again, barely listening to the names being called after mine. I stared at those empty chairs as if somehow, if I just looked long enough, they'd change, like I had imagined the whole thing. But they didn't. The seats stayed empty. The cards stayed untouched. After the ceremony, people were reuniting with their families, posing for pictures, laughing, crying, wrapped in proud arms. I walked alone toward the exit, past clusters of happiness I couldn't be part of. I passed one mother sobbing into her daughter's shoulder and another dad tossing his son's graduation cap into the air while a sibling filmed it all. I didn't even take a photo. What would be the point? I didn't want a picture of myself in that gown with no one beside me. I didn't want a snapshot of disappointment. When I got to my car, I sat in the driver's seat for a while, still in my gown, just staring at the dashboard. My phone buzzed once. A message from my mom. "Sorry honey, we couldn't make it. Things got busy. Congrats though." That was it. One sentence. No call, no video message, no explanation. Just "things got busy." I didn't even know what that meant. Did they forget? Did they not care? Did something happen that they didn't think was worth sharing with me? I thought of all the sacrifices I made for this degree, missing holidays, skipping birthdays, turning down vacations I couldn't afford, all so I could study and save and eventually make something of myself. And when I finally did, they didn't show. I didn't cry, not right away. I felt hollow more than anything, like someone had scooped something out of me and left an empty space behind. I drove home in silence, took off the gown as soon as I walked through the door, and hung it back in the closet. Not because I planned to keep it as a memory, but because I couldn't bear to look at it anymore. Later that night, I scrolled through social media and saw my classmates' posts, pictures with their families, long captions full of gratitude and love. I didn't post anything. I just closed the app and stared at the ceiling of my dark apartment, wondering what it was about me that made it so easy for them not to come. It was past midnight when I finally worked up the energy to plug my phone back in and turn the screen toward me. I had thrown it on the couch hours ago, not wanting to look at it after that half-hearted message from my mom. For a while, I thought maybe I could just sleep off the ache in my chest, but it clung to me like wet clothes, heavy and impossible to ignore. So I sat up, wrapped a blanket around myself, and opened the apps I had been avoiding all day, telling myself it would hurt less if I just ripped the band-aid off. Maybe, I thought, I'd find some kind of excuse, some hint that they had been caught in traffic, or that someone got sick, or that something truly unavoidable had happened. Something that would let me believe it hadn't been a choice. I tapped open Instagram first, scrolling numbly past the same smiling faces I'd seen earlier, grads with their parents, long captions about sacrifices, success, pride, tears of joy. I kept scrolling, hoping to push through the sting, until I landed on a photo that made my thumb freeze mid-swipe. It was my brother's profile. He had posted earlier that evening, while I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of the auditorium, still in my cap and gown, wondering what I had done wrong. The photo was of our backyard, the one I grew up in, the one where we used to have birthday parties and 4th of July cookouts and lazy summer evenings with citronella candles and paper plates. I recognized the wooden fence with the peeling paint, the mismatched lawn chairs pulled around the old grill. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over everything, and they were all there, my mom, my dad, my sister, her kids, even my cousin Mark and his girlfriend I'd never met. All of them, crowded together, drinks in hand, smiles wide, mid-laughter. Plates stacked high with burgers and corn on the cob. Someone had dragged the Bluetooth speaker onto the porch, and I could almost hear the faint beat of a summer playlist in the back of my mind. But what stopped my breath cold wasn't the image itself. It was the caption beneath it. Just 3 words, clean and casual like it meant nothing, only family today. Only family today. I read it once. Then again. And again. It felt like the floor gave out beneath me, like my chest had been scooped out and left with a vacuum of silence and disbelief. I blinked hard, hoping I had misread it, that maybe there was more to the post, a joke, an inside reference, some kind of context that would soften the blow. But there wasn't. Just that photo, just those words, and the flood of comments underneath from friends and extended relatives saying how lovely the gathering looked, how happy everyone seemed, how nice it was to keep it just the close ones. I stared at the screen, barely breathing, the edges of my vision going blurry as the weight of it sank in. They hadn't forgotten about my graduation. They hadn't missed it because something urgent came up or because life got in the way. They knew. They knew exactly what today was. And they chose not to come. They didn't want to be there. They didn't want me there. They had a barbecue. A fucking barbecue. While I stood alone on a stage, staring into empty chairs, they were grilling hot dogs and laughing and drinking beer like nothing mattered, like I didn't matter. That caption wasn't just a thoughtless phrase. It was deliberate. It was a boundary drawn in bold ink. Only family today. And somehow, in that moment, they made it unmistakably clear that I wasn't part of that anymore. I felt something sharp twist in my stomach, a mix of nausea and grief and humiliation. All the memories of growing up with them, of being the one who always tried to hold everyone together, of staying on the phone with my mom for hours when she and dad were fighting, of babysitting my sister's kids when she couldn't afford daycare, of helping my brother with his resume when he got laid off. None of it mattered. All those years of quietly carrying the weight of being the dependable one, the invisible glue, they had peeled me out of the picture like I was never there. I wanted to scream, to break something, to call one of them and demand an answer, but I didn't. I just sat there, holding my phone, staring at that caption like it was written in fire. I didn't cry. The tears wouldn't come. I was too far past sadness and too deep into something colder, something that settled into my bones like frost. I locked my phone and set it face down on the coffee table. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the fridge in the kitchen. I sat there, wrapped in my blanket, still in my pajamas, and for the first time in my life, I felt entirely and unequivocally alone. Not just physically, but in a way that went deeper than words. Like a door had been closed and locked from the other side, and no one even thought to check if I was still standing on the porch. 3 days passed in a kind of numb silence that didn't feel like healing but more like a fog I couldn't find my way out of. I moved through the hours mechanically, making coffee, answering a few work emails, pretending to read, but everything felt hollow, as if I were walking through a version of my life that no longer belonged to me. I hadn't spoken to my family since graduation day, not that there was anything left to say. Every time I thought about that photo, my family smiling in the backyard under that cruel caption, I felt that same pressure behind my ribs, like something was trying to crush me from the inside. I kept telling myself I should be used to their indifference by now, that I shouldn't be surprised, but the truth was, it still burned. No matter how much you try to rationalize it, being unwanted by the people who raised you carves something out of you that doesn't ever quite grow back. On the morning of the third day, I was sitting at my small kitchen table, scrolling absently through job listings just to feel productive, when my phone buzzed. The sound startled me. It had been so long since I'd heard it ring with anything that wasn't a notification from an app. For one fleeting second, I let myself hope it was someone from work, or maybe an old friend reaching out to check on me. But when I looked at the screen, I saw my father's name. Just seeing it there made my stomach tighten. It wasn't that we texted often, but when he did, it was always brief, always transactional. I opened the message, half bracing myself for what it would say. It was only one line: need $5,000 for your mom's birthday. That was it. No greeting. No question mark. No mention of my graduation. No acknowledgement that 3 days ago, I had achieved something I'd spent 6 years clawing my way toward. Nothing resembling love or even basic respect. Just a demand, because that's all it ever really was with him. I stared at the words for a long time, feeling that familiar cocktail of disbelief and resignation settle into me. He didn't ask if I could help, he just assumed I would. That I'd do what I always did, fix things, pay for things, give until I had nothing left, all while being treated like an afterthought. I opened my banking app almost out of habit, my thumb hovering over the transfer option. For years, I had been the one quietly bailing them out of overdraft fees, covering surprise bills, sending money just until next week that never came back. But this time something inside me snapped, not in anger, not even in rebellion, but in a calm, almost eerie kind of clarity. I typed in his account information, entered the amount, and then paused. Instead of $5,000, I typed $1. I stared at that number on the screen, that single digit, and something about it felt perfect, tiny, cold, final. In the note section, I wrote one word: congrats. Then I pressed send. For the first time in years, I felt an odd sense of peace. Not joy, not satisfaction, just stillness. Like I had finally stopped apologizing for existing. I set my phone down, exhaled slowly, and went to the door. I changed the locks that afternoon. It wasn't even a symbolic act, it was practical. Necessary. I didn't want to risk one of them showing up uninvited, crossing another boundary as if it never existed. The sound of the new lock clicking into place was sharp and clean, and for the first time, my apartment actually felt like mine. A space they couldn't enter, couldn't twist, couldn't use. That evening, I made myself a simple dinner and sat on the couch with the lights low, listening to the quiet hum of the city outside. I was starting to believe maybe, just maybe, I could rebuild something from this silence. Then, around 9:30, a knock came at the door, 3 slow, deliberate knocks. My stomach dropped instantly. No one ever visited me unannounced, and the sound carried a weight that made the air feel suddenly thick. I stood up, heart pounding, and went to the peephole. 2 uniformed police officers stood in the hallway. Their faces were calm, neutral, almost apologetic. I opened the door a few inches, enough to speak but not enough for them to see much inside. One of them, a tall man with kind eyes, gave me a polite nod. "Evening, ma'am." "Sorry to bother you," he said in that practiced tone officers use when they're trying not to alarm someone. "We got a call requesting a wellness check." My throat tightened. "A wellness check? On me?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. He nodded. "Your father called in. Said he was concerned you might be unstable, possibly in danger of harming yourself. Mind if we come in and just make sure you're okay?" For a second, I couldn't even respond. The audacity of it, the manipulation, the absolute cruelty of that choice, hit me like a punch. I almost laughed because it was so grotesquely absurd. 3 days ago, they couldn't be bothered to show up for the most important day of my life, and now they were pretending to care about my mental state? I could practically hear the script my father must have used on the phone, that calm, authoritative tone of his, the one that always convinced people he was the rational one. He'd probably told them I was overly emotional, maybe even unstable, to make sure I looked like the problem. He always knew how to twist the narrative just enough to stay the hero. I stepped back, opened the door fully, and gestured for them to look around. My apartment was spotless. No signs of distress, no disarray, just a quiet, ordinary space. "I'm fine," I said, forcing my voice to stay even. "He called because I wouldn't give him money." The two officers exchanged a quick look, the kind of subtle glance people share when they recognize a pattern they've seen too many times before. The taller one gave me a small nod. "All right, ma'am. You seem perfectly fine. We'll make a note of that." When they left, I stood in the doorway for a long time after the sound of their footsteps faded. My hands were trembling, but not from fear. From clarity. It was as if every illusion I had ever clung to about my family had just been stripped away in one final act. They hadn't forgotten me at graduation. They hadn't been too busy. They hadn't just drifted apart from me by accident. They had chosen, over and over again, to push me out, and when I finally stopped letting them take from me, they called the cops to punish me for it. I closed the door, locked it again, and leaned my forehead against the wood. The echo of that lock turning felt louder this time, more deliberate. I realized I wasn't just shutting them out of my apartment. I was shutting them out of my life. For good. Looking back, I think the most painful part of everything wasn't the graduation, or the barbecue, or even the wellness check, it was the fact that none of it was new. It was just the final, undeniable proof of something I had been trying to unsee for most of my life. The truth is, I grew up knowing I was invisible. I didn't have the words for it back then, but even as a little girl, I understood that in my family, I was never the one people made room for. I was the background character in a story that never had a place for me at the center. I didn't make waves. I didn't get attention. I just blended in, quietly doing what was expected, while the spotlight always seemed to fall on someone else. That someone else was almost always my brother, Jake. He could breathe and get a round of applause. I remember once, when he managed to pass a basic math test in middle school, after failing the two before it, my parents took him out for ice cream and acted like he had won a national science award. I had brought home straight A's that same week, a perfect report card I had worked my ass off for, staying up late and studying through lunch breaks, and my mom just nodded at it without even putting down her phone. "Good," she said, like it was nothing more than expected. I didn't get ice cream. I didn't get a hug. I didn't even get a photo for the fridge. At the time, I told myself I didn't mind. I was the good kid, the one who didn't cause trouble, the one who didn't need the extra help. But deep down, I did mind. I minded all the times Jake got bailed out, when he crashed his car at 17 and they replaced it within a week, when he dropped out of college after one semester and they still talked about him like he was finding his way. I minded how every small success of his was a triumph, while my achievements were brushed off like chores on a checklist. I minded how being responsible became my identity, not because anyone praised me for it, but because someone had to be. When I got my first job at 16, working weekends at a bookstore, I was so proud. It wasn't glamorous, and the pay was barely above minimum wage, but it was mine. I was earning something. I remember how excited I was when I got my first paycheck. I showed it to my dad, expecting maybe a smile, or a simple well done. Instead, he said, "Great. Now you can help with groceries." And that was that. My money wasn't mine, it was the family's. The moment I had something, they saw it as theirs to redistribute. If I bought myself a new pair of jeans or saved up for a concert ticket, I got side-eyed comments about being selfish or ungrateful. My mom once said, "You wouldn't have that job if we didn't let you live here, so technically, it's all our money anyway." Every dollar I earned came with guilt attached. Not because I didn't deserve to spend it, but because they made me feel like I was stealing from them every time I kept something for myself. There was always this unspoken rule that anything I did was never really for me, it was for the family. If I stayed late at work and missed dinner, I was avoiding responsibilities. If I saved up instead of handing over my tips, I was holding out. I was 16, working part-time, and already being treated like a debtor in my own home. This dynamic didn't stop as I got older, it just changed shape. When I moved out for college, I paid my own rent, took out student loans in my name, worked night shifts to cover bills, and still sent them money when Jake couldn't make ends meet or when my mom needed help with a late utility payment. No one ever said thank you. No one ever asked if I had enough left for myself. It was just expected, like it was my role, like I owed them something for being born. And somehow, no matter how much I gave, it was never enough. They always framed it like they were the ones supporting me. My dad would say things like, "You wouldn't be where you are if it wasn't for us," as if emotional neglect and financial guilt were some kind of twisted investment strategy that had paid off. I wanted so badly to believe that if I just kept proving myself, working harder, earning more, staying quiet, they would eventually see me. Not as a paycheck. Not as an obligation. But as a person. Their daughter. But they never did. They saw Jake. They saw his messes, his failures, his half-hearted efforts, and they met him with grace and softness and pride. But when they looked at me, they saw utility. A resource. A quiet, uncomplaining backup plan. So no, none of this started with graduation. That was just the moment I stopped pretending. The moment I stopped making excuses for people who never once showed up for me when it mattered. I didn't lose a family this year, I just finally admitted to myself that I never really had one. There's a strange kind of quiet that settles into you when you spend years giving more than you can afford to people who never really see you. It's not dramatic or sudden, it's slow and creeping, like a leak in a ceiling you keep ignoring until one day, everything underneath it has warped. That's what my 20s felt like. Every month, every holiday, every phone call that began with "Hey, can you help me out for a bit?" was another small drop, another slow erosion of something I didn't even realize I was losing. When I started undergrad, I thought moving away for school would change things between me and my family. I imagined they'd finally take me seriously, that distance might give them perspective. I was wrong. Instead, it just gave them a new way to take. I was working 20, sometimes 30 hours a week on top of classes, campus library, coffee shop, summer internships that paid in experience. I was scraping by, surviving on microwaved noodles and discount bread, yet somehow, there was always this unspoken expectation that part of whatever little I made belonged to them. My dad would call once a month, not to ask how I was doing, not to check if I was eating properly or getting enough rest, but to say something like, "Your mom's short on gas money," or "Your brother's car insurance is due." I didn't even think to question it back then. I just sent what I could, even when that meant I skipped meals or stretched my groceries to the point of embarrassment. It wasn't just about money, though. It was about this constant imbalance, how I was always the one reaching across the gap, always the one showing up, always the one trying to make things feel like family. Every holiday, every birthday, I brought gifts. Thoughtful ones. I spent hours picking them out, choosing things that would make them smile or remind them that, no matter how far I'd gone, I hadn't forgotten where I came from. I'd save up for weeks to afford something small but meaningful, a watch for my dad when he started his new job, a nice perfume for my mom, toys for my sister's kids. Every time, I'd walk into their house with bags in my hands and hope it would mean something. Hope it would bridge that invisible space that always hung between us. But it never did. They'd accept the gifts with distracted smiles, like it was routine, like I was a delivery driver dropping off packages. Sometimes they wouldn't even unwrap them while I was there. No one asked how school was going, or what I was working on, or what I wanted to do after I graduated. If I tried to bring it up, the room would shift, someone would change the subject, or my dad would turn on the TV, or my mom would start cleaning something that didn't need cleaning. They didn't want to hear about my world because it wasn't theirs. My successes didn't fit into their narrative. I think, in some way, it made them uncomfortable. One Christmas, I remember bringing home a box of homemade cookies from a recipe I'd learned during a holiday event my grad program hosted. I'd wrapped them carefully, tied with a ribbon, and included a handwritten note. It sounds small, but I had spent hours baking those because I wanted to give something personal, something that felt like love. My mom barely looked at them. She said, "You didn't have to go to all that trouble," and then handed me a plain white envelope in return. Inside was a blank greeting card, literally blank except for the printed words, "We're proud of you." No handwriting, no signature, no message. It looked like something she had grabbed from a dollar store on the way home. I stared at it for a long time, waiting for her to say something to fill the silence, something real, but she didn't. She just smiled, that polite, distant smile she always gave me when she didn't know what else to do. I kept that card for a while. I don't even know why. Maybe because I wanted to believe it meant something. Maybe because it was the closest they'd ever come to saying those words out loud. But even then, it didn't feel like pride. It felt like a placeholder, like a prop they used to pretend they had done their part as parents. It wasn't a celebration of who I was, it was an obligation they were checking off the list. There was one Thanksgiving during my second year of grad school when I had to decide between paying my electricity bill or buying bus tickets to go home. I chose the tickets. I spent the 6-hour ride rehearsing what I'd say when I got there, how I'd tell them about my research project and the scholarship I'd won. I thought maybe that would finally get a reaction. Maybe this time they'd see how hard I was working. I arrived to find them sitting around the living room, half watching football. No one looked up when I walked in. Dinner was microwaved leftovers from the day before because they'd decided to have the real meal early with some neighbors. "We figured you wouldn't make it," my mom said casually, as if that didn't sting. I remember laughing awkwardly, setting down the pie I'd brought, and pretending I didn't care. I cared. I cared every time. I cared even when I told myself I didn't. I cared when they called me ungrateful for saying I couldn't afford to send more. I cared when my brother joked that I thought I was too good for them now that I had a degree. I cared when I realized that the only time my phone ever rang with their names on the screen was when they needed something, from money to help with a bill to advice they wouldn't even thank me for. I cared when I sent money I didn't have, gifts that went unopened, messages that went unanswered. And the most brutal part was, I kept doing it. Out of habit. Out of hope. Out of the naive belief that love was something you could earn if you just gave enough of yourself away. It took years to understand that some people will take until there's nothing left of you, and when you finally stop, they'll make you feel like the selfish one. It was a Tuesday afternoon, one of those quiet, overcast days where everything feels paused and nothing dramatic is supposed to happen. I had just come back from the laundromat, set my laptop on the counter, and was halfway through sorting socks when I saw the notification pop up in the corner of my screen. The subject line of the email was simple, too simple, new joint account opened. At first, I assumed it was spam or maybe some marketing email from one of the banks I had closed accounts with years ago. But then I saw my full name in the greeting, and my stomach turned in a way that I've learned to trust: tight, low, alert. I clicked it open, and within seconds I knew something was wrong. The email wasn't just a promotion or an error. It was a confirmation, an official notice from a regional bank I hadn't used since my undergrad years. The message congratulated me on successfully opening a new joint checking account, co-owned with a second party listed right beneath my name, Randall Hartley, my father. The room fell completely silent, as if the air itself had dropped out of it. I reread the email 5, maybe 6 times, blinking hard as I tried to process what I was seeing. My first thought was that it had to be a mistake. I hadn't opened a new account. I hadn't authorized anything. And yet there it was, in black and white, my name and my father's, attached to an active account created less than 2 weeks earlier. The date listed was the same week as my graduation. I felt my heart begin to pound in my ears. I opened my browser and immediately logged into the bank's website using the login information I still had from that old account. By some cruel miracle, it worked. Once inside, I navigated to the new joint account, my fingers trembling over the trackpad. The balance was low, just over $80, but the transaction history told the real story. Multiple withdrawals, card purchases, and transfers had drained the account down from an opening balance that made my chest seize up. It had started with $4,800. And every single dollar of it was gone within 3 days. I clicked through each transaction in order, and a picture began to form. The gas station 10 minutes from my parents' house. A bulk grocery store purchase. A rental deposit for outdoor furniture. Catering from a local barbecue place. Dozens of small charges for drinks, decorations, party supplies. The timeline matched exactly with the date of the backyard party, the one in the photo my brother posted, the one captioned "Only Family Today," while I was walking across a stage alone. I sat frozen, the cursor blinking back at me as I stared at the evidence. It was right there. They didn't just skip my graduation. They threw a party with my money. My parents had opened a joint account in my name, withdrawn nearly $5,000 that I never saw, never consented to, and spent it on ribs, beer, and tiki torches for an event that doubled as a silent rejection of me. I scrolled down to the account application section, looking for answers, and that's when I saw the final detail that made everything spin. My signature. It was there, poorly scanned but visible, a signature next to my father's. But it wasn't mine. It was close enough to fool someone who didn't know any better, but I knew my own hand. The slant was off. The loops in the Y and L were tighter than mine. It looked like someone had practiced it a few times and settled on good enough. I felt the blood drain from my face. My father hadn't just used my name. He had forged my signature. I called the bank immediately, waited on hold for almost 20 minutes, and finally got through to a representative who, to her credit, didn't treat me like a lunatic. I explained everything, how I hadn't opened the account, hadn't signed anything, hadn't authorized a joint ownership with anyone, let alone my father. She listened carefully, asked a few clarifying questions, and then put me on hold while she pulled the application documents. When she came back, her tone had changed slightly, firmer, more deliberate. The account, she said, was opened in person, at our Branch Street location. My hometown branch. Both parties were present, according to the file, she continued, and then paused before adding, and the ID used matches the name on the account, your name. My mouth went dry. Was the ID scanned? I asked. Do you have a copy of it? Another pause. Yes, she said. But, it doesn't look like a standard driver's license. More like a student ID. It doesn't have a barcode. We flagged it internally, but it passed at the time. I closed my eyes. It was a fake. A fake ID with my name on it. Used to open a bank account I didn't know about. And somehow, they got away with it. I asked for everything to be documented, flagged, locked down. I asked to have the account frozen immediately. She said they would begin an internal investigation, that a fraud case could be opened, and that they would need a formal statement from me. I agreed to everything. I gave her my contact information, case reference number, and promised to send a written affidavit that same day. But even after I hung up, I sat there at the counter in complete stillness, staring at the screen with the knowledge that my own family hadn't just betrayed me emotionally, they had violated me financially. Legally. Personally. They had taken my name. My trust. My hard-earned money. And they used it to celebrate my absence. I spent the next 3 days doing nothing else. I didn't eat much. I barely slept. Every hour was consumed by gathering proof, organizing statements, copying transaction logs, printing out email confirmations, and downloading every bit of documentation the bank sent me. I created a folder, an actual physical folder, because I wanted them to see it. To hold it. To understand, in black and white, what they had done. I wasn't just angry anymore, I was clear. There was something cold and precise about the way I moved through those days. I made phone calls to the bank's fraud department. I filed an official report. I sent notarized letters with certified mail receipts. I went through every legal step they told me to take because I knew, deep down, that none of them would ever admit the truth unless it stared them in the face. When everything was ready, I called them, my father, my mother, and my brother, and invited them to meet me at a diner halfway between our houses. I picked the location carefully. It was neutral, public, familiar. We'd gone there for Sunday breakfasts when I was little, before things grew bitter and strange. I figured they'd be less likely to cause a scene there. My mother sounded hesitant, my brother uninterested, and my father didn't say anything beyond, fine. That was typical. I didn't care. I just needed them to show up. The folder sat in my passenger seat the entire drive. I kept glancing at it, as if it might shift or unfold on its own. It was packed tight with page protectors, each one labeled and timestamped, the forged signature, the scanned ID, the transaction history, the bank rep's formal letter confirming that the account had been opened in person using false identification. I had even highlighted specific entries that matched the purchases made during the barbecue. Every detail had a place. I wanted to give them the opportunity to deny nothing. They were already there when I arrived, sitting in a booth near the back, drinks half finished, menus closed. My father sat stiffly on one end, arms crossed, his eyes as unreadable as ever. My mother avoided looking at me. My brother slouched against the window, scrolling through his phone with one hand. The smell of old coffee and grease clung to the vinyl seats, and for a second I felt like I was 14 again, trying not to say the wrong thing. I slid into the seat across from them and placed the folder on the table without saying a word. The dull slap it made as it hit the laminate was louder than expected. My father narrowed his eyes. "What's this?" he asked. I opened it slowly, deliberately, and turned the first page around to face them, the account opening confirmation. My full name. His. The date. The branch address. The header, joint account summary. "This is the account you opened without my knowledge," I said. My voice was steady, but I could feel the tightness in my chest, like my lungs had shrunk. He didn't look down at it right away. Instead, he scoffed, barely disguising the contempt in his voice. "It's not a big deal. It's family money." I stared at him, genuinely stunned at how easy it was for him to dismiss something so calculated, so violating. "Family money?" I repeated, quieter this time. I flipped the page. "Then why did you forge my signature?" I pushed the second sheet forward. "Why did you use a fake ID with my name on it? Why did you spend nearly $5,000, my money, without telling me?" My mother shifted uncomfortably beside him, her hand drifting toward her coffee like she needed something to hold on to. My brother finally looked up from his phone, gave the page a cursory glance, then leaned back. "You're being dramatic," he said flatly. "It's not like they stole from a stranger. Your family." That word again. Family. Always used as both shield and weapon. Always invoked when they needed something, never when they were asked to give something back. I leaned forward, resting both hands on the edge of the table. "You stole from me," I said, looking directly at my father. "You forged my name. You opened a financial account without my permission. You spent money I worked for, money you had no legal or moral right to touch, and you used it to throw a party on the day you didn't show up to my graduation." My father opened his mouth, but I cut him off. "Don't say it's not a big deal. Don't say it's just money. You made a choice. You made several. You knew what you were doing." For a moment, the table was silent. The clink of dishes from the kitchen, the low hum of a nearby booth's conversation, and the quiet hiss of the soda machine were the only sounds. My mother finally spoke, her voice fragile and tired. "We didn't mean to hurt you." I turned to her, my hand still trembling slightly. "Then why didn't you come to the graduation? Why didn't you answer my messages? Why did you throw a party and post about it while pretending I didn't exist?" She didn't answer. She just looked down, as if the question itself was too heavy to lift. My father leaned back, his jaw tight. "You've always thought you were better than us. You think just because you got some degree, you're above your own blood." I felt something crack inside me, not pain this time, but something harder. Something final. "No," I said. "I think I finally see you for who you are." I closed the folder, slowly, carefully, and stood up. I didn't take the folder with me. I left it there, on the table, like a mirror they could choose to look into or ignore. It didn't matter anymore. Without another word, I walked out of the diner and didn't look back. I hadn't even made it halfway to the door when I heard the faint chime of the diner's entrance behind me, that soft jingle of cheap metal that somehow felt deafening in that moment of silence. I didn't turn around right away. I thought maybe it was just another customer, some stranger walking into the middle of a tension they'd never understand. But then I heard the voice, calm and familiar in a way that reached something in me I hadn't felt in a long time. "Emily." I turned and saw him. My grandfather. Harold. He was standing just inside the entrance, his coat still on, the collar turned slightly in the wind. He looked older than I remembered, not in the way people age over time, but in the way someone ages under the weight of disappointment. His eyes weren't angry. They were sharp, steady, full of something that made everyone else in the booth suddenly shrink. I could see it happen. My father's posture stiffened, my mother lowered her gaze instantly, and my brother shifted uncomfortably in his seat like a child caught doing something shameful. Harold didn't say anything else right away. He simply nodded toward the booth I had just left, the one with the folder still sitting open on the table. I hesitated, unsure of whether to stay or go, but something in his face, the deliberate calm, the clarity, made me turn back and sit down. He walked slowly but deliberately to the booth, not even glancing at my father as he moved past him. Instead of taking a seat beside his son, he slid in next to me. That choice alone said everything. He didn't look at the folder. He didn't raise his voice. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a thin, beige envelope, the kind of legal stationery that made your chest tighten just at the sight of it. Without a word, he placed it on the table in front of me and gently pushed it forward. The flap was already open. I looked at it, confused for a moment, until he spoke, his voice low, measured, but carrying a weight that settled over the entire booth like a slow-building storm. "I'm reviewing my will," he said. "It's been overdue for a while." I saw the flicker of tension ripple through my father's face before he could suppress it. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. My brother stared hard at the napkin dispenser like he could disappear into it if he just focused hard enough. Harold continued, his gaze never leaving mine. "I've been watching all of this unfold. Quietly. Too quietly, maybe. And that was my mistake. But I wanted to see who shows up when no one's looking. Who gives without asking. Who takes, even when they've been given more than they deserve." He paused, then added, "I've already spoken to my attorney. Nothing's final yet. But I'm making notes." My father finally spoke, voice clipped, defensive. "Dad, this isn't about." But Harold cut him off with nothing more than a raised hand. He didn't look at him when he did it. It wasn't loud or aggressive, it was worse. It was quiet, disappointed, final. "This is exactly what it's about," he said, still staring at the envelope, like the truth lived inside it and didn't need to be argued. "It's about what kind of people we are when we think no one is watching." No one said anything. Not for a long moment. The clatter and hum of the diner seemed distant, unreal. I looked down at the envelope, then back at Harold, and for a second, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time, seen. Not for what I could give. Not for what I owed. But for who I had been all along, quietly holding together the pieces of a family that never saw me as more than a utility. Harold finally turned to look at me, placing his hand gently on the envelope. "This is yours to read, if you want to," he said. "Or not. It's not a promise. Just a reminder that not everyone is blind." He looked at my father then, for the first time, and the silence that fell between them was louder than any shouting could have been. My father's face was pale, his jaw locked. My mother had gone completely still. My brother, who had spent a lifetime being told he was the golden one, couldn't even lift his eyes to meet mine. I didn't open the envelope. I didn't need to. Harold's presence alone had already said what needed to be said. He had stepped into a room that had always been tilted against me and quietly, firmly, shifted the weight. Not out of revenge, not out of performance, but out of something simpler and more powerful, accountability. He sat there beside me for a long moment, not saying another word. He didn't need to. And for the first time in my life, I felt like someone had stood beside me, not out of obligation or image, but because I mattered. The moment my grandfather finished speaking, the weight in the air shifted. It wasn't loud or explosive at first, just dense, like the atmosphere before a storm breaks. My father's jaw twitched, a visible pulse flaring in his temple. He looked at Harold, then at me, then back at the folder lying between the empty coffee cups and untouched silverware, and something in him snapped. Without another word, he pushed himself up from the booth, the movement sudden enough to send his glass tipping over, ice clinking against the table as soda spread toward the folder like an accusation. He didn't try to stop it. He didn't apologize. He just turned and walked out of the diner, stiff and furious, the bells above the door giving one final angry chime as it slammed shut behind him. My mother flinched at the sound but didn't move. She sat frozen for a moment, then leaned slightly across the table, her voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking softly could erase everything we had just laid bare. "You have to understand," she said, eyes darting to Harold as if afraid of being scolded. He was under a lot of pressure. "Things haven't been easy. He didn't mean to hurt you. He just thought." I cut her off before she could finish the sentence. "He thought I wouldn't find out," I said. "He thought I'd keep doing what I've always done. Give, and stay quiet." She didn't argue. She didn't apologize either. She just lowered her gaze and murmured something that sounded like, "We did what we thought was best," as if that could possibly explain stealing from your own daughter to fund a celebration of her absence. Nathan, my brother, still hadn't said a word. He stood, looked at me briefly with that same detached glance he'd used all my life, the one that always made me feel like I was an inconvenience instead of a sister, and then turned to leave without saying goodbye. No explanation, no guilt, no recognition of the damage he had helped enable. He just walked out after our parents, like he always did, tucked safely into the orbit of their approval. The booth was quiet after they left. My grandfather stayed beside me for a while longer, sipping what was left of his lukewarm coffee, not saying much, just being there. That kind of silence, I had learned, was the rarest kind, the kind that held weight and intention, not emptiness. When we finally stood to leave, he held the door open for me, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like the outsider in my own bloodline. A week passed. 7 quiet, strange days. I kept waiting for fallout, angry phone calls, guilt-tripping texts, someone showing up at my door to plead or accuse. But it never came. The silence from my family wasn't surprising anymore. It was just confirmation of what had been true all along: if I stopped reaching out, the line between us would stay dead. Then, on the 8th day, I got a call from Harold's attorney. His voice was formal, polite, and direct. He told me that Harold had completed the paperwork. The will had been officially rewritten. I asked who the new beneficiary was, bracing myself for something uncomfortable, unsure of what this gesture would mean in the long term. And then he said the name. The Emily Hart Grant for Independence. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I sat at my kitchen table, phone pressed to my ear, heart suddenly loud in my chest. I asked him to repeat it, and he did, slowly, clearly. A scholarship fund, created in my name, designed to support students from fractured or unsupportive homes. It would be awarded annually to one undergraduate and one graduate student who, like me, had been financing their education on their own, without family support. I asked who had come up with the idea. He said Harold had insisted on it. He said my grandfather wanted something permanent, something that couldn't be twisted or erased or buried under the weight of excuses and rewritten memories. Something that would turn everything I had survived into something that helped someone else. He said Harold had reviewed every clause personally. He had removed my father's name from everything: property, assets, financial accounts. He had even included a specific directive that no member of my immediate family could contest the will or receive legal representation paid for by the estate. He wanted it locked. Final. Unchallengeable. Later that afternoon, I got another email. This time, from the same bank where the joint account had been opened without my consent. The subject line read, "Fraud Case Update, Final Resolution." I opened it with that now familiar blend of dread and expectation. The body of the email was short and clinical. The bank had completed its investigation. Based on the evidence submitted, including the forged signature, false identification, and unauthorized account creation, my father had been permanently banned from holding or co-holding any personal or business accounts at the institution. His name had been flagged in their internal fraud system. Legal authorities had been notified, though it would be up to the district office whether to pursue criminal charges. It wasn't vindication in the Hollywood sense. No courtroom scene, no dramatic confession. Just a line drawn in the sand. A system that, for once, had listened. A door that had closed behind him, and stayed closed. I sat back in my chair, staring at the 2 emails, one about a grant built in my name for people like me, and one about a man who once called me dramatic when I said he had stolen from me. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even justice. It was something quieter. A shifting of weight. A balancing. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I owed anyone an explanation. I wasn't looking for it. That's what made it all the more surreal. It found me in the same way most things online do, uninvited, buried in the middle of a scroll I shouldn't have been doing that late at night. A friend had sent me a screenshot, no explanation, just a simple "you seen this," and a cropped image of a post I hadn't thought about in over a year. My brother's words, written in that same smug tone he used in real life, floating above a photo of me in my college hoodie, captioned with a sentence that had once gutted me: "When your sister gets a degree and suddenly thinks she's a damn queen. Can't wait until she learns life isn't made of gold stars and sympathy." At the time, it had stung more than I ever let on. He had posted it during my second year of grad school, right after I had turned down an invitation to spend Christmas at home, citing work and exhaustion, but really, I just couldn't stomach another holiday pretending not to notice how out of place I was. He had posted that photo without asking, pulled it from a family group chat where I'd shared it proudly, my university sweatshirt, standing in front of the lab building I had spent hundreds of hours in. And he turned it into a punchline. I never responded publicly. I hadn't said anything at all. I buried the anger, like I always did, telling myself it wasn't worth the fight. That no one would believe me if I tried to explain how deep that cut actually went. Back then, the comments were all the same: laugh reacts, inside jokes, subtle jabs from his friends. One person had written, "She's probably majoring in attention." He liked it. He didn't delete it. He didn't even hide it from me. But now, more than a year later, it had resurfaced. Not on my timeline. Not in some family drama thread. It had exploded on his. Nathan worked for a mid-sized tech company, nothing flashy, but big enough that image mattered. Someone from his office had found the post, probably during some casual dig through his online history, and shared it on a public forum, linking it to his employee profile. The timing couldn't have been worse. The post went viral in less than 24 hours. People called it cruel, misogynistic, tone-deaf. Screenshots spread across LinkedIn, Reddit, even X. But what stung the most, what made it impossible for him to spin or walk back, was the caption itself. There was no ambiguity. It wasn't a joke misunderstood out of context. It was mockery. Of me. Of my work. Of everything I had clawed my way through. And now, suddenly, the same voice that had echoed through years of family silence had been silenced by the weight of his own arrogance. I didn't seek out the aftermath, but it found me anyway. Word spread fast: he had been called into HR, asked to explain the context, failed to do so without further incriminating himself. He tried to say it was just a joke between siblings, but the internet isn't forgiving when the target of the joke is someone who spent years quietly surviving. Especially not when that someone now had a scholarship named after her. Especially not when the context around the post had started leaking into comment threads, stories about the graduation, the forged account, the stolen money. He lost his job by the end of the week. I didn't celebrate. I didn't repost it. I didn't write a clever reply or share it with a snarky caption of my own. There was no sense of victory in it, only a slow, heavy settling of something that had never been properly named. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't catharsis. It was justice, not the loud, cinematic kind, but the quiet, uncomfortable truth finally being held up where everyone could see it. Some of his friends distanced themselves. Others unfollowed him without a word. My parents never mentioned it directly, but I could feel the shift in the silence. There were no passive-aggressive texts trying to bait me into defending him. No sudden calls pretending everything was fine. Just silence. Cold and absolute. The kind that comes when even they can no longer justify what they allowed to fester for so long. What haunted me wasn't that they had turned their backs on me. I had come to terms with that long before the diner, before the forged account, before the bank report. What stayed with me was the realization that none of them thought it would ever come back to them. That they had lived for so long inside the echo chamber of their own entitlement, they genuinely believed they were untouchable. That they could erase my presence in real life while keeping me as a tool, a prop, a target. And that no one would ever call them on it. But now the world had called. And for once, I didn't have to say a thing. Justice, it turns out, doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it comes with a notification, a quiet headline, a message from a friend. Sometimes it's not about vindication, it's about the simple, undeniable truth making its way to the surface and refusing to be ignored. I didn't rush to hang anything up. For a long time, my wall stayed mostly bare, white and quiet, like the blank space I needed after everything collapsed. My apartment had become a sanctuary by necessity, a space untouched by expectation or guilt, somewhere I could finally exhale without checking who was listening. But after everything, the graduation, the account, the confrontation at the diner, the fallout, I started to feel a need rise in me that I didn't fully recognize at first. Not for decoration, but for something else. Proof. Not to convince anyone else. Just me. So I went to a small local framing shop one weekend. No fanfare. No dramatic playlist playing in my ears. I brought 3 items with me in a worn tote bag: my diploma, folded carefully inside the university's dark blue leather cover, the letter my grandfather had written, the one he handed me when he showed me the revised will, typed on clean cream stationery in his precise, patient handwriting, and the old brass lock I had removed from my front door the night I changed the keys and finally decided that access to my life would never again be granted by guilt. The man at the counter asked if it was for a gallery wall. I just said, something like that. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. These weren't trophies. They were artifacts. Each one held a story that had almost been buried beneath silence. Now, I was going to give them space to live. The diploma came first. I chose a clean, sharp black frame with a double matte, no gold, no school colors, just neutral tones that drew the eye to the paper itself. My name printed in full. My degree, Master of Science in Data Science. The seal, embossed and quiet. It had taken 6 years, 2 jobs, dozens of nights without sleep, and a lifetime of being treated like I didn't matter. I wanted it on the wall, not because of what the degree said about me, but because I had earned it with no one cheering in the audience, no one clapping from the front row. It was my knowledge, bought with sacrifice, not applause. Then the letter. My grandfather's words were only a few paragraphs long, but they held more weight than anything my parents had ever said to me. I had reread it so many times that the creases had started to wear thin. He hadn't apologized for them. He hadn't tried to fix the past. He had simply acknowledged what I survived and told me, clearly, that he saw me. That he recognized everything I had carried. That he believed in honoring people who earned their place with integrity, not noise. I chose a wooden frame for it, dark walnut, slightly imperfect, the kind of material that felt like it belonged to something old and honest. I had the framer mount the letter fully open, the signature clearly visible, the date stamped cleanly in the bottom right corner. Last came the lock. It was heavier than I remembered, cold even after resting in my bag. It was a basic brass deadbolt, nothing special, the kind you'd find at any hardware store. But to me, it was more than metal. It was a boundary. The day I removed it, I had turned a silent corner in my life. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't begged anyone to understand. I had simply closed the door. And made sure it stayed closed. I had the lock placed in a shadow box with a small brass plate beneath it, unengraved, just the lock, untouched, unpolished, a relic of the moment I stopped giving people the right to hurt me just because we shared DNA. When I brought everything home, I didn't rush to hang them. I laid them on the floor first, leaned against the wall, and just sat with them. Hours passed. The sky outside changed from pale morning to muted blue to violet dusk. And then, slowly, one by one, I hung them above the desk where I now worked remotely, the same desk where I had once cried over equations, job applications, and family silence. Together, they formed a wall of truth. Not just a timeline of what had happened, but a reflection of what I had reclaimed. My diploma, what I had learned, what I had built with my own hands. My grandfather's letter, what I had finally been told by someone who mattered. And that lock, what I had taken back when no one else would protect me. They weren't given to me by anyone who had tried to break me. They weren't earned through approval or praise. They were taken back, piece by piece, in the quiet aftermath of betrayal, through 1,000 small choices that no one ever applauded. And now, they belonged to no one but me. I didn't plan the moment, but it came anyway, quiet and unscripted, like most of the important ones do. It was late, the kind of late where the world outside goes still and every sound inside the apartment feels sharper, heavier. I had just finished putting away a stack of documents I no longer needed, bank correspondence, printed emails, copies of legal filings, slipping them into a box I would eventually file, not because I needed the reminder, but because some stories deserved to be archived with the weight they carried. The apartment was still. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of old pipes beneath the floor. No voices, no footsteps pacing above, no television buzzing in the background. For the first time in months, maybe longer, I realized there was nothing I was waiting on. No call, no apology, no sudden understanding that would make everything make sense. It had already come, just not in the form I used to hope for. I looked over at the wall where I had hung the 3 framed pieces, my diploma, my grandfather's letter, and the old brass lock. Each one silent, unmoving, but full of weight. They had become something more than symbols. They were anchors. Evidence. Not of the pain I came from, but of what I had built in spite of it. And then, almost without thinking, I said the words aloud, to no one in particular and to everyone who had ever made me believe I had to earn what should have been freely given. Family doesn't always mean safety, I said softly, letting the words hang in the air like smoke. Sometimes love means walking away. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't even angry. It was just the truth. Not the one I had grown up with, the one that said love was obligation and blood meant loyalty even in silence, but the truth I had come to know for myself. I hadn't lost a family. I had stepped out of a performance. One I had been cast in without audition, forced to play the role of the grateful daughter, the dependable sister, the silent giver, even as the script bruised me in places no one cared to see. I had clung to that script for too long, mistaking endurance for connection, convincing myself that if I just stayed longer, tried harder, gave more, something would shift. But families built on imbalance don't suddenly become whole when one person starts bleeding more. Letting go hadn't been a moment. It had been a process, a long unraveling of narratives I didn't write, a shedding of guilt that was never mine to carry. And now, in the quiet, I could finally see it clearly. I wasn't healing to return to them. I was healing to return to myself. There were no more doors left to close. No more confrontations to have. No more proofs to offer. I had told my story. I had survived it. And now, I had stepped outside of it. In their place, I had built something no one could dismantle. A home that was mine. A career that was mine. Peace that I didn't have to earn, and boundaries I no longer had to explain. I didn't look back when I turned off the lights and walked to bed. There was nothing left in that direction for me, no comfort, no clarity, no identity I needed to reclaim. I had already come too far. And for the first time in my life, letting go didn't feel like losing something. It felt like finally putting it down.